Hello, fellow white people. The hashtag Black Lives Matter is in the public eye again, possibly more than it's ever been before. And as usually happens, I've seen some people say that the hashtag is racist. So let's talk about that. Is Black Lives Matter racist? No. That's all I've got for you today, Rebel. A reminder that I write and publish a new episode of... Alright, no, fine. Let's talk about it at least a little bit more. In this video, I'm going to talk about violence against black people. I'm not going to show any video or graphic depictions of that violence, but it's still going to get very uncomfortable. So, first, hello, fellow white people. Still with me? I want to start the video by saying you should listen to black people on this topic before listening to me. They have experience with this topic that I just don't. Everything I'm about to talk about, I learned from black people, and I've put several links in the description of this video to black voices you should follow and listen to online. But I also recognize from past experience that some people want to be educated on this topic by someone they know personally or who they can relate to. So if I'm that person for you, I hope this can be a palatable introduction to a very complicated topic that you should look further into afterwards. Alright, now, the first thing I'm going to say here might make you a little uncomfortable to hear, and I just want to encourage you to push through that discomfort and see if you can find a greater understanding on the other side of it. Accusing black civil rights activists of being the real racists is a very, very old tactic. I mean, it certainly happened in 2014 during the Ferguson protests, and in 2013 when George Zimmerman killed Trayvon Martin, which was when the Black Lives Matter hashtag was first created and popularized. But this tactic is even older than that. Martin Luther King Jr. was repeatedly and rabidly accused of being a racist. King was accused of increasing racial divides and tensions rather than trying to fix them. Critics even said he incited violence, despite everything he said to the contrary. Of course, that sounds absurd to you and me now, 70 years later, but it's true. In the time he lived and worked, Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the most reviled men in America, at least to white people. And that is because powerful people were invested in the racial power structure of the time, and so they used their reach and influence to spread the idea that King was the real racist. After all, he talked about race all the time, right? And he talked specifically about black people. Isn't that just inherently racist? Why wasn't he talking about white people? Why wasn't he talking about all people? And so powerful figures in media and culture were able to do this because King was asking for civil rights for black people, which is something the Black Lives Matter movement is still running up against today. I think it's important when we look at the slogan, Black Lives Matter, that we realize the simplicity of it. It's those three words. Because when some people hear Black Lives Matter, it seems like they hear other words in there, like they hear only Black Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter more. And so a common defensive response is to say, all lives matter, right? If you think the other person is saying only Black Lives Matter, you could be forgiven for saying, wait, all lives matter. So the first obvious response to this is that if all lives matter, then Black Lives Matter. All lives matter is only a counter-argument if the other person is saying only Black Lives Matter, which again, they're not. We've already looked through the lens of history once, so let's do that again for this situation with a little mental exercise. Imagine you're back in the heart of the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King Jr. is advocating for full civil rights for black people. Would you have said, wait, but all people deserve civil rights? I mean, you'd be correct. Obviously, all people did deserve full civil rights in the 60s, just like they do today. But like, white people already had them? If someone's house is burning and they say, please save my house, it'd be a pretty dick move for a firefighter to say, okay, whoa, all houses should be safe. Yeah, obviously they should, but that house is burning. What are you gonna do? Hose down the house a block away that isn't burning? However you personally feel about gay marriage, I think we can all agree it would be pretty stupid to hear a gay person say gay people should have the right to get married and respond with, whoa, all people should have the right to get married. Again, yeah, obviously that's true. But cisgender opposite-sex couples already have the right to get married. When queer people point out that they don't have equal marriage rights under the law, they're not discriminating against straight people, they're pointing out a literal fact. Or, they were before it became legal, at least in most places. But that's a complicated topic and it's not what we're talking about today. But Is it a literal fact in the case of Black Lives Matter? Are Black lives treated as if they don't matter? Now, it's usually at this point in the conversation that critics like to bring up black on black crime. If Black lives matter, why aren't black activists working to solve black on black crime? After all, more black people are killed by other black people than by cops. Why aren't black people worried about that? First, it's important to note that intra-racial crime, which means crime by one race to members of the same race, is the norm across America, not just in the black community. According to the FBI, the vast majority of all violent crimes, about 80 to 90%, are committed by a member of the same race as the victim. That's true for whites as well as black people. But so, okay. Why not focus on that? Why aren't black people doing something about the crimes in their own neighborhoods? And the answer to this is that they are. Black people do a huge amount of work to reduce crime in their communities. Black people are among the most politically active citizens in America. They're way more likely to vote than white people, if they're eligible to vote, and they're more likely to participate in local government, not just in national elections. Black people are also more likely to do community activities and organize initiatives to improve their communities, despite the fact that, on average, they have less resources to improve them with. So, no one, and I mean absolutely no one, says that black on black crime doesn't exist. Black people are aware it exists, and they do a lot of work to reduce it. When someone says, why don't you care about black on black crime, they're just kind of advertising that they don't actually know much about what goes on in black communities. And that kind of makes sense if it's not their community, but with that being the case, it's not really smart for them to speak about it as if they know better than its own members. And as a note, the work black people are doing to reduce crime is working. The homicide rate in America has been consistently dropping year after year for a long time now, but the number of black people killed by cops has continued to go up. So concerns about black on black crime don't really do anything to help the situation or address what's actually being talked about. Now, there's another important difference between black on black crime and violence by cops, and it's how the state responds to it. When black people commit violent crimes, they're usually found, arrested, and thrown in jail. That is the state's response to their crimes, and most people agree it's an appropriate response. The same is not true for cops. Cops kill more than 300 black people every year, and that's just killings, not assaults, home invasions, wrongful search, or confiscation of property, which happens in much higher numbers. But cops are hardly ever even indicted for these incidents, much less convicted. You might see a handful of indictments in a year across the country, and several years can pass with no convictions whatsoever. And this is true even if cops are caught on camera doing something that any normal citizen would think is clearly wrong and should be illegal. For example, say a group of cops are caught on camera strangling a black man to death. They throw him to the ground and crush his windpipe. He chokes out, "I can't breathe," several times before falling unconscious, and he's then pronounced dead before it's possible for him to receive medical attention. You probably think I'm talking about George Floyd, who was murdered almost 2 weeks ago, but I could just as easily be talking about Eric Garner, who was murdered in 2014 in New York in very similar circumstances. Just as with Floyd, most people who see Eric Garner's video are horrified. You are, after all, watching a man be killed by cops. You watch them hold him down, you watch them choke him, you watch him beg them for his life, and then you watch them ignore him. I want you to do another little mental exercise and take the uniforms off of those cops. I want you to picture them as just a group of people with no official capacity. A bunch of people you've never met before, surrounding a black man, throwing him against a car or building and then down onto the ground, where they proceed to restrain and choke the life out of him while he pleads not to die. So should those people be charged with a crime? At this point, you might be saying, well, of course, and you might follow that up with, and they are being charged with a crime. All 4 of the cops present for George Floyd's killing are now facing charges of either manslaughter or murder or aiding and abetting. If that's the case, I'm glad you think that's an appropriate response, but I want you to know, or to remind you if you've forgotten, that the cops who murdered Eric Garner were never even indicted. This is despite the fact that we saw them on camera do it. We saw them restrain and choke him. We saw him plead for his life. We all saw it. The charges against the cops who killed George Floyd represent a massive exception to the rule. And they only came after nearly 2 weeks of protest in the streets, in every state in America and all across the world, with massive public pressure leveled against Minneapolis cops and government. Remember that initially, the cop who murdered Floyd was only going to be charged with the lightest possible form of murder, and the other 3 participating officers weren't going to be charged at all. And as a side note, this is why people aren't necessarily satisfied, even with these increased charges against the officers. There's a very good chance that they won't be convicted because in America, that hardly ever happens. So, bringing this back to the subject of this video, Black Lives Matter is a message to the state, and it's about the law. It says we want cops who commit crimes to be treated the same way you'd treat any other criminal. And that message is sadly necessary because cops are usually treated much better, facing little to no consequence, even when they've done something that the vast majority of people agree is wrong. So, now I have to bring up a couple of uncomfortable facts, and the first is one I'm sure many of my white viewers might be chanting at the screen right now, or they've been holding onto it in their minds while they've been watching. The first is that you can always find black people who disagree with Black Lives Matter, as a movement and as a hashtag. Often when white people are feeling threatened by the statement, Black Lives Matter, they'll post a video a black person made criticizing the movement, and usually reciting some of the other things I've talked about in this video. What about black on black crime, and so on. The first thing I'd like to say about that is you can also find black people who think slavery was a good thing, or that Martin Luther King Jr. was a racist. I'm not going to link you to their videos. You're a clever person, I'm sure you can find them with a quick Google, and I have no desire to elevate their voices. The point is, just because a black person holds a different view on Black Lives Matter or other civil rights issues, that doesn't necessarily mean they're automatically right. And when we're listening to black voices on this subject, like I recommended at the start of the video, it's important that we be careful of confirmation bias. This is another complicated topic, but confirmation bias is when we latch on to messages that support or confirm what we already believe. It's something we add to our arsenal of talking points that we then use to destroy opposing viewpoints rather than listening to them and evaluating whether there's any truth contained within them. For example, when I said that the vast majority of homicides against whites are committed by other whites, some of you might have said, well, that's not true. Most homicides against whites are committed by black people. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And you might think that because you've seen it said online somewhere. Maybe on some conservative blog or news outlet, someone said, the majority of murdered whites are murdered by black people, and maybe they even had a fancy graph to prove it that looked very official. If that's the case, I want you to ask yourself, do you believe that conservative blog or news outlet because they're more likely to have correct data than the FBI? Or do you believe it because it lends strength to your argument? One of those is a good reason to believe it. One of them isn't. Bringing it back to the matter at hand, it's easy to latch on to one or a few black voices who agree with you and ignore the 98% of black voices that don't. This is an imperfect analogy, but going to one of those black people for information on Black Lives Matter is a bit like asking for information on Judaism from someone who's ethnically Jewish, but neither they nor their family have ever participated in the actual Jewish religion. Maybe a better comparison would be asking someone what it's like living in America when they've only visited a couple of times. They might have some information and a couple of good pieces of advice, but do you really trust their opinion more than someone who's spent their life in this country? Now, let's get into the second uncomfortable truth, which is related to the first. Many people want to listen to one or two black voices who criticize Black Lives Matter, but they're unwilling to do the same to the minority of police officers who criticize police brutality and stand with the Black Lives Matter movement. For example, I personally know a police officer who says Black Lives Matter and believes in it with her whole heart. She personally calls for the firing of police officers who are caught in the wrong. When people say, oh, it's just a few bad apples, this police officer I know responds the same way I do. And that's that the saying is, a few bad apples spoils the whole barrel. In other words, bad cops make the cops around them worse and do irreparable damage to cops as a whole. This police officer I know agrees that there are some jobs where you just can't have even one bad apple, and cops are one of them. She, like me, feels that if you've got 10 bad cops and 1,000 cops who know about the bad cops but don't actively do something to penalize and remove them from the police force, then you've got 1,010 bad cops. So the question then becomes, if you're willing to listen to one black person in a video saying Black Lives Matter is racist, why aren't you willing to listen to one cop who says that yes, there are bad cops, they do get away with brutality and murder, it is an awful problem in America, and we do need drastic change to address it. Now, with all that in mind, let's bring it back to the original question. Is Black Lives Matter racist? And the answer is no. No, it isn't. It's a statement by black people to the government to protest the wrongful killing of black people. It's a reminder that Black Lives Matter when people are acting like they don't. If you're someone who has a problem with the hashtag Black Lives Matter or the movement behind it, and you're still watching this video, I have to say, I really appreciate it. I hope that you see the purpose of the statement now, and if you still disagree, I hope you at least understand where I and other people on this side of the issue are coming from. Now, it's possible you're thinking, well, I understand what you're saying. If the Black Lives Matter movement explained it this way, they'd get much farther. If that's you, then I want you to remember what I said at the beginning of this video. I learned everything I've told you today from black people. They do explain it exactly this way. So if you can see my point, but you've never been able to get it when black people were talking about this issue before, it might be worth examining why that is. But regardless, I'm just glad to serve the purpose of someone you can relate to. And that's all I've got for you today, Rebel. If you want to support the cause of racial justice in America and the protests that are going on right now, I've got a donation link on the screen right down there. Right now, that link goes to support causes associated with the current protest movement in America. In the future, if donations are needed elsewhere, I'll try to remember to update that link so that the money goes where it's most needed. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next Friday. Bye!